next, and just to say, I do see Aoife and Anya want to come in, so I will let you in this next round too. So sorry, Deputy
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and now there's so many things that I want to say that I don't even know quite where to start. But first of all, I suppose just to say thanks to everyone for coming into the committee. I think this input is crucial for us as a committee to understand the different and really specific issues in this area. Secondly, I think when we have these discussions, it's really important, as Senator Lynn Ruane highlighted, to acknowledge that deeper cultural and societal problem that is there, that forces people into poverty and structurally keeps them there, and the amount of children that go into care from that dysfunctional system. It absolutely has to be highlighted, and thank you for doing it. And I think in relation to, speaking about foster carers and the different kind of aspects of that role, and it is a very complex one, it is important to highlight that, like in everywhere, we see an unconscious bias towards people in poverty, and we know that, just an example, it's absolutely there. The people who are most likely to end up in poverty, the single biggest determining factor is one-parent families, for example. We do need to acknowledge that foster parents don't always get everything right. I don't think any parents always get everything right. It's just a reality, and it's good to be able to talk about that as well. And in relation just to the trauma-informed policy and the need for that and more training, that is true of every, I think, department in government as well. So often I deal with or work with women fleeing domestic violence, and when they go to the Department of Local Housing, there isn't a trauma-informed response there. This needs to be played out throughout society, and I think the need for that in this particular area is so prevalent in the room today that can really be felt. I suppose we can't overstate the importance of foster carers, and I think, crucial is the reality of better outcomes compared to children who go into residential care. Apart from what you spoke about, a particular attachment style sometimes suits other children. I wasn't aware of that, but for the most part, better outcomes come from children in foster care compared to residential care. So that's something I think that we need to focus on, and the fact that 90% of children in care in Ireland are in foster care, so 10% in residential care, is something that we should be really proud of. But the fact that it's down from 92% is something that we really need to look at. And at the moment, the allowance is €352 a week. I think I'm right to say that. And then for over 18s, it's 300 a week. With the rising cost of living, the fact that that hasn't been addressed in so long is just simply outrageous, for the most part, because we know there's a reduction in people going to foster care, and we want to get it back up to 92%, we want to get it higher for better outcomes. That is key. It's also important to note that if you look at this, that's the most important bit, but also when we look at this from a budgetary perspective, it makes absolutely zero sense that we're seeing a decline in the number of children going to foster care, because, and I would like, if I'm incorrect, for somebody to correct me, that I think it costs €6,000 a week to have somebody in residential care. So we're looking at €352 a week for somebody in foster care and €6,000 a week to have somebody in residential care. We're seeing declining rates of children going into foster care, and the amount going to foster families has not been looked at in so many years. So I'm wondering, I think, is it 60,000 children in foster care at the moment, roughly? Is that correct? Just under 60,000. I'm just 6,000. I'm wondering what would be the figure if all of those children were in residential care. How much are foster families saving the public purse? I know that's separate to better outcomes and all of the more important things we need to be looking at. But with the budget fast approaching, I think it's a really good time to highlight, for one, how much we need this for the better outcomes. For two, how much does this save? It's an absolute no-brainer. And I don't know why there's been no figures kind of put out here today, but from my understanding, one of the figures that people are looking at are asking for this budget is an increase in €100 a week, be that for under 18 and over 18. Should it be more than that? I'm interested to hear people's input in relation to that. And then, presumably that would play some part in encouraging other families to do it. And then in addition to that, I suppose, so what would encourage more families to do it? Is it more than is there something else other than that we need to look at? And in terms of the recruitment and retention of social workers, what kind of remuneration, what specific things should we know as a committee that needs to be done? And just as well, when we're talking about all of these things, I think I said better outcomes a lot of times there, but speaking from experience as well, I think for families, often they're families who have foster children in them, there's better outcomes for the entire family. I certainly felt that when I was growing up. I had a foster sister, and for the entire family, I think we had a better outcome. I think it's important to highlight that as well, that the benefits are multifold. So yeah, I'll just leave it there for now. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Deputy Kearns. So I see Valerie and I know Anya. Okay, so it looks like everybody wants to come. We'll start with Valerie and then Anya. And Aoife, I know you wanted to come in from before as well.
Yeah, but what I'd like to answer is something in relation to the recruitment and retention of foster carers. And I want to, first I want to thank the number of our public representatives that are here today. I sat at a similar committee on recruitment and retention of social workers. It was a much smaller number of people, much smaller number. So I'm really, really delighted there's so many of you here today, because it shows a fantastic interest in the children of our nation and the most vulnerable children of our nation. And indeed, as Senator Owen has talked about, the most vulnerable parents in the nation. In terms of the recruitment and retention of social workers is key. Now, this goes across all of the what used to be called the allied healthcare professions. There's a shortage in every sector. ISW managed to get, with HSE and TUSLA, we put in a case to get it put on the critical skills list again, and we got that, we achieved that. But there just aren't enough people. So there's people running around jobs. It's like a big pot of jobs and too few people running around inside of it. So these kids, these children who are in care, they don't have a social worker who is the link between them and their family on both sides, their foster family and their birth family. They don't have that person who should be with them through that, knew them before they come into care, knows them when they're in care. This is the person who knows their life, that has that big file up in TUSLA that has everything about them in it. Those people don't exist. They're what foster carers used to call the lifers, the ones who went into social work. And 20 years later, they're still knocking on Mrs. Foster Carer's door, and they know each other like, you know, for all that time. That level of knowledge isn't there because people are moving around the system, and those people don't exist anymore. They just don't stay in the jobs long enough for the children, for the foster carers and for the birth families. So getting enough social workers into the system is key, so that we can actually then, it gets less easy for people to, when the going gets tough, to move job. So they'll actually stay, and maybe, you know, stay for longer than a year or two, get to know these children, get to know their lives. That, and I don't know what the answer to it is, but I know it is an absolute crisis for the children, for their birth families and for the foster families, that there just aren't enough people in social work is the profession that, if you like, took foster care from what it was and developed into what we know it now. Social workers are the people who we assess the foster carers, we review them, we supervise them, we have everything to do with them. So we're the profession that knows foster care better than any other. And it's crucial that we get enough people into that system. The answer to that, I don't know what it is, but I know it's crucial.
Okay, thanks. Valerie?
Can I just add 2 points that addresses both Lynn's and Holly's, some of their questions. And building on what Anya is saying, it's about the care, and what Catherine has, about the care team. I mean, the care team around the child needs to be very careful that the child is not overly pathologised. And while I can, I absolutely concur with trauma-informed practice, but trauma-informed practice that only looks at the individual and does not look at the network of relationships that child comes from, but also the network of relationships in the professional network, because we know all too often that the professional network begins to mirror the difficulties that the child has come out of in that network. And professionals, and I train professionals, but I work with professionals, I work with families, but we are not always to the forefront in looking at what we're bringing into those networks and what pushes our buttons and our responsibility around our own reflexivity. And I think that care team also needs the space within which to look at their own care needs, because if we don't care for the carers, we know what happens. And just the allied point in terms of the recruitment and retention, Carol Coulter's fantastic work in terms of her court reporting has now been saying to us for 15 years about the overrepresentation of children from diverse backgrounds in the care system. I mean, internationally, we know what happens with minority populations and the care system. There's an overrepresentation. There's also an underrepresentation of them as foster carers. So in fact, we here in Ireland are making all the same mistakes, and we don't have to. And that, you know, there are many potential foster carers in diverse communities, if supported, if encouraged, if spoken to. Through the best way to recruit foster carers, and Catherine would talk, is word of mouth. We also need exit interviews for every foster care that leaves Tusla moving to privates, and every foster care that leaves fostering. Many foster carers leave because there's a life cycle. You know, people do it for X number of years. It's a bit like rearing kids. But we need to gather that data, and we need to gather it not necessarily from the organisation that the foster care is really annoyed with, but that we need, and I think if could be in a really good position through many of the services that could begin to collate that data.
Is it Rory or Marissa or both going to come in? Okay.
I suppose I want to, talk about firstly, the idea, how, Deputy, you were talking about the idea, of that number, and that idea of support for, first of all, foster carers, and then for when it changes to aftercare support. In my own opinion, like, my hardest issue, in my own foster care was that at 18, my care leavers, my foster carers couldn't support me anymore. Because first of all, when you turn 18, the support goes to the care experienced young person. So that aftercare support. But unfortunately, they were not in a financial position to keep my room open in that house and support me getting the money going to college. So while I had that money, like, once I got that aftercare support, I had to go off to college. And to keep that room open for me at weekends, I would have had to pay them rent, but I couldn't afford to pay rent in Limerick and in, their home as well. And that's where we're talking about support. If you're on about bringing in support, that idea of many care leavers losing their homes, because many foster carers want to keep the children in their house, but they're unable to 100%. Keep them in because of that, financial position of, do they get another foster child in and keep the financial support that they're getting, or do they keep your room open and lose that because you are going off to college and different things? And that caused a lot of issues as I was coming up to the age of 18. And the thing is, if we could support both, it would be a brilliant idea, because it would keep a lot of, care experienced young people, in higher level education, and allow them to come out of this idea of poverty and, break those barriers that many of them are facing, because once they reach 18, they either face homelessness or their own poverty-stricken issues of their own care. On top of that as well, working, is the idea of how important social workers are. In my experience, like, because of, the rotation of social workers constantly, I had over 15, 20 social workers easily in my 10, 11 years, if not more, and that's only just the ones I can remember. There was many that breezed in for 2-3 months, left again, see you later, maybe I chatted to them once. But what you have to do is you have to tell your story again and again and again. They don't know, because of the caseloads, they don't know you, they don't know anything about you, so you have to keep telling this story to them. And what happens is, it causes trust issues. Like, if you have to keep telling your story again and again, and repeating that, that trauma that you've already faced, you start getting annoyed at the system, you start getting annoyed, and then you start lashing out, or you start causing issues, and because you don't trust anyone, because you can't trust anyone, because you're like, oh, sure, they're going to leave in 6 months. Sure, what's the point of telling them my story if they're leaving me again? And that's where the issues are. If we were able to retain social workers and have that one person, or even two, look, sometimes I know people retire, people move on, like, if you had one or two that you can just constantly trust, it would mean that, children in care would have security, and they would feel okay to tell, to open up and, talk about the problems or the needs that they need, but many of them don't, and instead just lash out and get labelled the way they are, and that's where the stigma comes against